Have you ever wondered what happens when the people we trust to keep us safe turn a blind eye? Picture yourself 35,000 feet above the ground, seated in the hushed luxury of first class, when a single sip of water becomes a fight for your life. Marcus Reed, a composed and driven tech CEO, finds himself suddenly gasping for breath, his world narrowing to a desperate plea for help that is met with laughter and indifference. How could a routine flight transform into a battleground of moral courage versus apathy? Who among us would dare step forward when authority looks the other way, and who would stand silent? From the moment Marcus's airways constrict to the explosive courtroom-style reckoning in the sky. This story probes the fragility of our assumptions and the power of a single voice to spark systemic change. Will compassion prevail over procedure? Can one emergency transform an entire industry? And what price do we pay for our silence? If you're ready to witness a drama that challenges every notion of duty, privilege, and justice hit like, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe now. The journey of Flight 427 is about to begin. He felt the fabric of the seat's headrest cradle the back of his neck, just as his mind drifted to the upcoming meeting in London. A coalition of nonprofit leaders awaited his keynote address on digital equity in education, and he had prepared every word to resonate with authenticity and purpose. He thought of the children he'd met in small villages last month, eyes bright with hope despite their limited resources. His daughter's face lingered in his memory too, her laughter echoing in his mind as she drew stick figures of their family on the refrigerator door. His phone lay silent in his jacket pocket, a deliberate choice to escape the buzz of notifications and commitments. For once, he allowed himself to simply exist in this mid-air oasis. The flight attendant, Travis Mulligan, approached with a practiced smile, his uniform crisp and impeccable. Travis had offered a blanket and a choice of beverages just moments ago, his friendly but rehearsed banter polished from countless interactions. Marcus returned the smile, nodding politely as the flight attendant inquired whether he needed anything else. Marcus waved a hand in gentle denial, grateful for a moment of uninterrupted quiet, his thoughts drifting back to the gentle hand of his mother when he was a boy learning to ride a bicycle, her steady reassurance giving him courage to pedal forward. The hum of the cabin felt like a soft lullaby, and for a fleeting instant, he imagined this flight as a bridge between past and future, one hand on the controls of his destiny, the other guiding him toward the next horizon. His gaze settled on the window beside him where the last vestiges of sunset flickered against the curvature of Earth. Shades of rose and lavender painted the sky as the sun dipped below the horizon in a stunning nightly performance. This was one of the privileges of high-altitude travel, the sky's exhibition of color, unseen by most below. He allowed himself the indulgence of wonder, the same wonder that had first driven him into technology, seeking to connect people beyond physical boundaries. Beneath that majestic canopy of clouds, he felt both infinitesimal and infinite all at once. He wondered how many others on this plane paused to take in the beauty, or if most were lost in screens and tasks. Marcus touched the rim of his glass again as if to confirm the solidity of reality. His reflection in the window seemed fragile, a silhouette outlined by twilight. He studied the slight crease at the corner of his mouth and the calm determination in his eyes. He thought about the path that led him here, a childhood marked by sacrifice, a teenage drive to excel in school, and the promise he made to his younger self never to forget where he came from. He had built a successful tech company from the ground up, but at his core remained a man determined to use privilege for progress. His breaths were steady, measured, as if each inhale and exhale whispered lessons taught by challenges overcome. A soft chime sounded as Travis returned to collect the empty water glass. The attendant's eyes flickered with professionalism when their gazes met. "All right, Mr. Reed," Travis asked, voice low enough not to disturb neighboring passengers. His courteous tone felt familiar, a practiced courtesy meant to reassure. Marcus nodded once, offering a faint smile. He noticed the flight attendant's name tag, the polished metal catching the cabin light. Travis Mulligan. Something in the way Travis's eyes darted suggested he was more comfortable with efficiency than empathy, but Marcus gave him the benefit of the doubt. After all, this was only the first leg of a long night across 3 continents. Marcus settled further into his seat, placing the glass precisely on the tray table's coaster. He let his mind wander again to the panel discussion he would moderate next week, the faces of panelists already forming in his thoughts. He rehearsed questions in his mind, seeking the right balance between challenge and encouragement. He imagined guiding leaders to candid dialogue about systemic inequities and meaningful solutions. His heart thumped with anticipation of driving change. As the cabin lights dimmed slightly for cruising mode, he felt a sense of calm purpose settle over him again, even as the world outside the aircraft evolved in its ceaseless spin of day into night. He reached for his leather briefcase under the seat, fingers brushing the smooth surface. Inside lay his notes, meticulously organized, and a personal journal filled with reflections from his travels. He had learned early on the power of documenting experiences, how written memories could crystallize emotion and guide future action. The journal's pages contained sketches of new ideas for grassroots initiatives and the faces of people whose stories shaped his mission. He wondered if one day he would share these pages with his daughter, to show her both his failures and triumphs, and to remind her that authenticity was more important than perfection. The seatbelt sign blinked on, a gentle reminder of the rules that governed this airborne vessel. The captain's voice followed soon on the intercom, warm and steady. He welcomed everyone aboard and informed the passengers that the flight was on schedule. Marcus listened to the familiar cadence, his chest rising and falling in sync with the reassuring tone. That moment of reassurance seemed so ordinary, so standard. It never occurred to him that in the midst of such calm protocol, something as mundane as a glass of water could become a matter of life and death. He returned the journal to his briefcase and allowed himself to sit back, to focus on what mattered most, the journey ahead and the purpose that fueled it. Unbeknownst to him, that first sip, so seemingly harmless, would soon challenge everything he believed about trust, responsibility, and the power of voice. In the hushed ambiance of first class, with fellow passengers drifting in and out of sleep, he wondered if anyone else sensed the fragile boundary between comfort and crisis. As the plane leveled off and cruising altitude was established, Marcus Reed closed his eyes and settled into the rhythm of flight, completely unaware of the storm that was about to engulf him and the choices that would define what it means to speak up when silence kills. Marcus Reed sits in his seat with a quiet confidence born of years spent navigating boardrooms and brainstorming sessions around the world. He is 42 years old, a black man whose composed exterior conceals a depth of experience and emotion. As the Chief Executive Officer of NovusLink Technologies, he carries the weight of decisions that affect thousands of employees and countless customers. Although he commands respect wherever he goes, there is a humility in his presence. He prefers to listen before speaking and to understand before acting. His hands rest lightly on his lap as he surveys the cabin around him. The soft glow of overhead lights casts gentle shadows across his face, emphasizing the calm determination in his dark brown eyes. Growing up in a modest neighborhood, Marcus learned early the value of perseverance. His mother worked 2 jobs to keep the family afloat, and his father taught him that integrity is more precious than gold. When he was 12, he built his first computer, by scavenging parts from discarded machines at a local repair shop. He taught himself to code late into the night while his siblings slept. Each breakthrough fueled his ambition, but also reinforced his belief that technology should be a force for good. His first startup was a simple community platform to connect volunteers with local charities. It did not make him rich, but it opened his mind to the power of using tools to build bridges between people. Now seated miles above the Atlantic, Marcus feels the familiar pull of purpose. His journey on this flight does not begin or end with profitability metrics or quarterly targets. He is traveling to speak at a summit on digital equity in education and to visit outreach centers in underserved communities. He imagines the faces of the young students he met last year in rural villages. Their eager eyes and hopeful smiles reminded him why he chose this path. He wonders how many of them will see his keynote address streamed online and draw inspiration to chase their own dreams. He feels responsibility not only to his company, but also to the countless individuals who invest their trust in his vision. In the stillness of the cabin, Marcus reflects on the delicate balance between ambition and empathy. He recalls the moment 3 years ago when a key investor threatened to withdraw support because of slower than expected growth. Faced with that pressure, he could have sacrificed community projects to appease shareholders. Instead, he chose to hold firm. He cut his own salary and asked other executives to do the same until the company regained its footing. That decision inspired loyalty among his team and reinforced his belief that real leadership is measured not by profit alone, but by the willingness to stand by one's principles. During the early morning hours on the day of this flight, Marcus woke before dawn. He meditated for 20 minutes, focusing on gratitude. He thought of his daughter Zoe, her laughter echoing through their home. At 6 years old, she has already developed an insatiable curiosity for science, drawing chemical structures and planetary systems in her sketchbook. She calls her father her real-life hero, yet Marcus worries that he teaches her too much about obstacles and not enough about rest. Today, he promised himself that after the summit, he would take time to play her favorite board game until she fell asleep. He carries a photograph of Zoe clipped to his notes, a reminder that no matter how high he soars, he must never lose sight of what truly matters. He settles deeper into his seat and allows himself to become aware of the details around him. The plush leather cushion supports him in a manner that suggests careful engineering. The curvature of the headrest fits the nape of his neck as if custom crafted for comfort. A soft blanket embroidered with the airline's logo lies folded on his lap, and a small pillow has been provided for his lower back. He notices the intricate stitching on the seats across the aisle and the subtle pattern woven into the carpeting. These details might go unnoticed by many, but to Marcus they represent the sum of countless efforts by designers, engineers, and artisans who each play their part in a larger tapestry. He glances at the man seated beside him in the window seat. The passenger appears to be reading a novel, his eyebrows occasionally raising at a suspenseful twist. Marcus admires the way people find solace in stories, and he wonders what narrative has brought the other man to this flight. Is he traveling for work vacation or reunion with family? The anonymity of air travel fascinates him. In this confined space, strangers share a journey, yet remain separate worlds. The hum of the engines and the gentle sway of the aircraft create a sense of unity, even as each person pursues their own purpose. Marcus's thoughts drift to the summit speech he has refined again and again in his mind. He sees the podium, the spotlight. He imagines the weight of eyes upon him. He feels a spark of nervous energy in his chest, yet it does not undermine his confidence. Rather, it reminds him that vulnerability and strength can coexist. He plans to begin his address with a personal anecdote about his early days building that first community platform at his kitchen table. He will recount the mistakes he made, the lessons learned, and the unexpected moments of triumph. By sharing his own vulnerability, he hopes to encourage others to embrace their imperfections as catalysts for growth. The flight attendant, Travis Mulligan, approaches with a discreet smile, offering beverage refills. Marcus thanks him and requests a cup of herbal tea, his preferred remedy for nerves. Travis nods and disappears into the aisle. Marcus watches the attendant glide through the cabin with practiced ease, balancing trays and attending to requests. He wonders what Travis's story might be. Perhaps Travis also carries a burden or a dream yet to be realized. The thought reminds Marcus that everyone has a narrative behind the uniform, the smile or the quiet composure. As Travis returns with Marcus's tea, the seatbelt sign flickers on a reminder that turbulence might be ahead. The captain's voice follows on the intercom, calmly informing passengers that the flight may encounter some bumps and to return to their seats. Marcus sips the tea, noting its subtle aroma of chamomile and mint. The warmth spreads through his chest, bringing a sense of calm reassurance. He watches the liquid swirl in his cup, and in that moment, he imagines resilience as being much like the fluid dynamics of tea and water, adapting gracefully to motion and pressure. Before closing his eyes, Marcus reaches for his personal journal and pen tucked in the seat pocket. He makes a quick note about the sight of the sunrise from 35,000 feet and how it colored the clouds in hues of rose and gold. He jots down a single line about the duality of solitude and connection in air travel. Then he pens a reminder to call home as soon as the flight reaches cruising altitude. In the margins, he sketches a simple diagram for a new prototype that might automate connections between mentors and students globally and increase access to resources. Even in these quiet moments, he cannot fully step away from the pull of innovation. He slides the journal back into its slot and leans back, closing his eyes. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he envisions the room where he will deliver his speech later this week and imagines the faces of attendees leaning forward in curiosity. He whispers a silent affirmation to himself, acknowledging both his privilege and his responsibility. As the plane glides through the night sky, Marcus Reed embraces the solitude and prepares for the challenges that await. In his calm repose, he embodies the essence of leadership that he hopes will inspire everyone who hears his story, whether on the ground or 35,000 feet above it. Marcus Reed sits back in his first-class seat and lets the gentle hum of the engines fill his senses. Around him, the cabin is muted, soft overhead lighting, hushed conversations, and the distant clatter of service carts being stowed. There is an almost sacred calm to this space, where strangers share a journey but remain cocooned in their own worlds. Marcus studies the pattern woven into the aisle carpet, tracing its subtle interlocking shapes with his gaze. It strikes him how meticulous every detail is, from the stitching on the leather seats to the precise curvature of the armrests. All of it is designed to comfort and reassure. He glances out the window and watches the sky deepen from pale blue to indigo. Below, the patchwork of land and sea stretches beyond the horizon, lit only by scattered city lights that sparkle like distant stars. He breathes in slowly, appreciating this moment of stillness before the long haul to London. Despite the quiet, he feels a sense of anticipation building in his chest, not anxiety, but a focused awareness of what lies ahead. In a few hours, he will stand before a room full of policymakers and activists, guiding a conversation that could shape the future of digital equity. He feels ready, yet remains respectful of the weight of responsibility. Travis Mulligan returns with a fresh blanket and pillow tucked under his arm. He drapes the blanket across Marcus's lap and offers him a pillow for his back. "Anything else I can get for you, Mr. Reed?" Travis asks quietly. His tone is polite but professional as he straightens in the confined space. Marcus offers a small nod and a genuine smile in return. He considers asking for another cup of herbal tea but decides to wait until the captain turns off the seatbelt sign. As Travis turns away, Marcus allows his mind to wander back to his childhood home. He remembers how his mother would lay out quilts on Sunday mornings and tell stories about her own upbringing in the rural South. Those quilts were colorful mosaics stitched from scraps of fabric, yet each one bore a unique pattern reflecting resilience and creativity. That memory has stayed with him across continents and boardrooms. He sees a parallel between those handcrafted quilts and this cabin's design, both born of many separate parts, working in harmony. The passenger in the window seat is engrossed in a hardcover novel. He sips a cup of coffee slowly as his eyes flick back and forth across the page. Marcus wonders what world the man inhabits between the pages. Is it a tale of adventure or a study in human nature? In this moment, they share the same physical space yet occupy entirely different mental landscapes. This duality of connection and separation fascinates Marcus and inspires the analogy he plans to weave into his speech about community building. Further down the aisle, Brian Cho is checking on another passenger and sharing a polite smile. Brian's movements are measured as he navigates through the narrow walkways. Marcus recalls Brian from earlier when he had offered him a refill. There was a flicker of warmth in Brian's eyes that suggested he genuinely cared about the comfort of each guest. Yet Marcus reminds himself that appearances can mask uncertainty or fatigue. He thinks of the long shifts flight attendants endure, balancing the needs of dozens of passengers while managing their own exhaustion. The cabin atmosphere shifts slightly as the lights dim for the overnight portion of the flight. Overhead reading lights are turned off and window shades are drawn halfway to preserve the view of the night sky. Soft instrumental music drifts down the aisle, encouraging relaxation. A few passengers tug on their blankets and close their eyes. Others lean their seats back and adjust their pillows. Marcus takes the opportunity to close his eyes as well and focus on his breathing. He inhales the faint scent of lavender from the blanket and feels tension ease from his shoulders. He allows himself a moment of surrender to the gentle sway of the aircraft. He visualizes the meeting in London unfolding successfully, delegates nodding in agreement, panels igniting lively debate, and new partnerships forming. He sees schools in remote areas gaining access to high-speed internet and classrooms connecting with mentors across the globe. He imagines young students discovering new possibilities through technology. The vision fills him with purpose and galvanizes his dedication. His phone remains silent in his jacket pocket. He made a conscious choice to disconnect from constant notifications so he could be fully present. Even so, he can't help but feel the pull of the digital world. His company NovusLink Technologies is launching a pilot program next month that will support community centers in under-resourced neighborhoods. He catches himself rehearsing emails he will send tomorrow morning to finalize logistics. He gently nudges those thoughts away and returns to the rhythm of flight, reminding himself that rest is as important as action. In the dim light, Marcus notices a young teenage boy glancing curiously down the aisle. He recalls the boy's name from earlier when he overheard a seatmate speaking softly. That's Malik Thompson. He is traveling with his family to visit relatives in Boston. The boy tucks his phone into his hoodie pocket and looks down at his hands as if wondering when the cabin lights will brighten again. Marcus considers offering a greeting, but decides against it. Sometimes silence is a greeting of its own, a shared acknowledgement of space and time. A soft chime rings gently, indicating that the seatbelt sign has been turned off. A collective sigh moves through the cabin as passengers stretch and loosen their restraints. Marcus reaches down and unclicks his own belt, flexing his legs gratefully. He rubs his ankles and calves, appreciating the freedom of movement. He notices that the cabin temperature feels slightly cool and leans forward to pick up the pillow Travis left behind. He places it behind his lower back and leans back again. The simple act of adjustment brings a small sense of comfort. Suddenly, a distant rumble of mild turbulence disrupts the stillness. The aisle lights flicker momentarily before steadying themselves. Passengers glance up at the ceiling, and some clasp their hands over their stomachs. The captain's voice soon filters through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. We are encountering a patch of rough air." The announcement is calm and matter-of-fact, yet its impact is profound. The cabin transforms in an instant from relaxed retreat to a place of precaution and awareness. Marcus secures his belt and closes his eyes for a second, letting the seat hold him firmly in place. He feels the plane drop slightly, then rise again as the turbulence moves through. He reminds himself to maintain steady breathing and focus on the line of thought he will open his speech with about the unpredictable nature of change and the importance of resilience. He likes the metaphor that we can prepare for smooth sailing, yet must retain the capacity to adapt when the unexpected arrives. He scans the cabin once more. Travis is attending to a passenger across the aisle, offering reassurance with a gentle tone. Brian stands by the service cart, ready to assist. Malik Thompson watches the overhead bins with wide eyes, bracing for more bumps. Further back, Derek Sullivan leans forward from his seat, his posture alert. Marco Lewis is seated in a jump seat near the galley door, observing the cabin floor. None of them know what is coming, but each is playing a role in the cabin community, whether as caregiver, protector, or witness. Marcus inhales deeply and exhales slowly. He feels a flicker of adrenaline as the plane continues to dance through the patches of rough air. He knows that in less than a day, it won't be the turbulence of wind that tests him, but the turbulence of injustice. He senses that his professional skills and moral convictions will soon be called into action in a very different way. As the cabin settles once more into its rhythmic hum, Marcus opens his eyes and feels a sense of steady resolve wash over him. He picks up his personal journal from the seat pocket and flips to a blank page. With a ballpoint pen, he writes a single sentence. "In stillness, we find clarity. In adversity, we find courage." He sets the journal aside and leans his head against the headrest pillow. He closes his eyes again, this time with a readiness to face whatever may come. The quiet before the storm has served its purpose. It has centered him and sharpened his focus. Soon the challenge will arrive, but for now he cherishes this tranquil pause at 35,000 feet. Marcus Reed lifted the glass to his lips once more and felt the familiar coolness of water flow across his tongue. He had intended only a quick sip before settling into his planned rest, but as he swallowed, a prickling warmth began to rise in the back of his throat. At first it was subtle, almost imperceptible. Then it grew sharper, as if tiny needles bore into his skin. His eyes fluttered open, and he set the glass down too quickly, the liquid splashing onto the coaster. He reached for a napkin and dabbed at the moisture, but his focus had already shifted inward. He noticed the tightening sensation ripple down his windpipe. His breath caught. He tried to speak, but the word lodged somewhere between his lungs and his mouth. For a moment he wondered if he had imagined it. He took a measured breath and felt the heat intensify. Marcus placed a hand on his throat, fingertips pressed against the fabric of his shirt. His pulse fluttered in his chest like the wings of a trapped bird. He thought back to his own medical record. He knew he had a shellfish allergy severe enough to warrant caution, but he could not recall any shellfish on the menu. He swallowed again, panic rising as the room began to blur. He looked up to see Travis Mulligan gliding past with a tray. Marcus raised a hand. Travis paused and offered a polite nod. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but the single word came out as a croak. "Water EpiPen," he managed to choke out. He pointed at his neck and then at the emergency kit icon on the wall. The next words stayed locked inside him. Travis's smile remained intact, an expression perfected by repetition. Fine, he might have thought if he were not forcing attention. He repeated the request with more urgency, but his voice sounded distant and weak. Travis glanced at Marcus's hand pressed against his throat, then back to his polite mask. "I am sorry, sir, but you need to calm down. You are disrupting the cabin," he replied in a tone meant to soothe, but lacking any real caring. Marcus felt a wave of humiliation crash over him. He had faced tough boardrooms and public scrutiny, but never had he felt so vulnerable. Sweat beaded at his hairline and dripped down his temple. He patted his shirt pocket where he always carried his medical alert card and epinephrine injector. His fingers closed around empty space. He had forgotten to bring it on this leg of the journey in his rush to catch the flight. His breath grew more shallow as he rose to his feet. The glass slipped again and crashed against the tray table with a sharp sound that echoed through the silent cabin. Heads turned and then quickly retreated. No one moved toward him. No one offered help. Marcus pressed one hand to the top of the tray table as his knees shook. The world felt distant and unreal. He tried to focus on the voice of the captain over the intercom, but the words slurred into white noise. He thought of his daughter and how she would say, "Always speak up when you need help." He had spoken, but no one heard. A ripple of uneasy whispers passed through the first-class cabin. Some glanced at their phones, and others shifted in their seats. Marcus looked across the aisle at Brian Cho, leaning against the galley door. Brian held a service trolley and wore a smirk, as if he found amusement in the tension. Marcus locked eyes with him and saw only indifference. He struggled to breathe, and his vision began to tunnel. He clutched the edge of the seat and forced himself to stay upright. He wondered if he would pass out and wake to find himself already lying on the floor with medics rushing in. The seatbelt sign above him blinked back on. In a normal routine, this would be an invitation to secure oneself, but Marcus had no clarity of mind to interpret it. The lights in the cabin dimmed slightly, and a soft hum returned. He gasped as a wave of cool air brushed against the back of his neck. He tried to reach for the blanket at his feet, but his arm felt heavy and unresponsive. He was adrift inside his own body, his mind screaming in silent agony. From somewhere near the front, a young man in a dark hoodie appeared at the end of the row. Malik Thompson had been returning home to Boston with his family for the holidays. He had overheard fragments of conversation and seen the distress in Marcus's eyes. Now he hesitated for a moment, then approached slowly. "Mister, do you need help?" he asked quietly. His voice trembled with uncertainty. Marcus tried to nod, but his head felt heavy. Travis stepped forward and blocked the view as if to shield everyone from the mess he had created. "Hesitate at your own risk," Travis warned with a cold stare. Malik sank back a step, unsure of what to do. Marcus could sense the boy's fear mirrored his own. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a strangled sound emerged. No help came. The laughter from behind the curtain was faint but clear. It was Brian's laugh. "They always fake it," he had commented earlier with cruel amusement. Marcus felt anger flare inside him, searing and raw. Fear and rage mingled into a potent mix that took him dangerously close to blacking out. Then a voice cut through the haze, masculine and urgent. Marcus turned his head toward the sound and saw a figure in a Navy uniform moving at a brisk pace. Derek Sullivan had served as an emergency medical technician for years before taking this flight for a family reunion. He recognized the signs of anaphylaxis immediately. He barked, "Make way, please," and brushed past Travis, who hesitated as though unsure if he had the authority to step aside. Travis's hand dropped from Marcus's shoulder in confusion. Derek yanked open the overhead bin above Marcus and retrieved the red emergency kit. He slammed it onto the tray table and flipped it open, revealing the injector and other supplies. Marcus watched in relief as Derek snapped open the safety cap and pressed the tip against his thigh. A jolt of heat radiated through his body and the world shifted. His lungs cooperated again, and he inhaled greedily as life flooded back. He closed his eyes and tasted freedom in the air. Derek spoke Marcus's name softly. "Are you all right?" Marcus and waited until he could speak before responding further. Marcus nodded and tried to form words, but all he managed was "thank you," his voice thick with gratitude and exhaustion. Derek stayed by his side until he felt certain that Marcus would remain conscious. Only then did he gather the kit and lean in to give Travis a pointed look that mixed reproach and relief. The cabin had come alive in the aftermath. Phones were out and cameras focused on the scene. Passengers murmured in outrage, "You ignored him. You could have killed him." The storm of accusation washed over Travis and Brian, who suddenly found themselves at the center of an unwelcome glare. Brian slumped against the wall, staring at the floor. Travis's expression shifted from faint calm to genuine panic. He lunged forward. "EpiPen, I can help. I am trained." He stammered, but no one took him seriously. In that moment, Marcus felt the power of witness. He rose to his feet, supported by Derek's steady arm, and looked around at the silent crowd drawing strength from their collective outrage. He could feel the electricity in the air as phones recorded every angle and voices rose in condemnation. He knew that this moment would not be forgotten, not by the crew, not by the passengers, and not by him. The first signs of trouble had been deadly, but they had also awakened something deeper in everyone who had watched. The aftermath of Derek Sullivan's swift intervention left the cabin charged with energy. Marcus Reed stood steady now, breathing easier and feeling the life flood back into his lungs. Yet around him, the air carried a different tension. Travis Mulligan hovered at the edge of his seat, eyes darting between the red emergency kit and the storm of disapproval converging on him. Brian Cho retreated to the far side of the galley door, shoulders hunched as if bracing for impact. Neither of them moved to check on Marcus once his breathing stabilized. Their indifference felt deliberate, a barrier erected to shield them from responsibility. In that moment, Marcus sensed more than relief. He sensed a chasm between duty and action that threatened to swallow any claim of safety on this flight. Travis's neatly pressed uniform seemed to mock him now. The same uniform that had once conveyed competence now signified a kind of armor he wore to avoid connection. He stared at the floor as passengers muttered accusations. "You ignored him. You put him at risk." Those words circled in his mind, but his face remained blank. For Marcus, the transition from fear to hope had hinged on one person's willingness to step forward. He thought of the quiet boy Malik Thompson, whose initial attempt was blocked by Travis's cold instruction. Why had Travis chosen procedure over compassion? How had courtesy become a substitute for care? Brian Cho's silence cut deeper than any harsh word could. He stood half-hidden behind the service cart as if the metal frame offered him cover. Marcus could almost see the cogs turning in Brian's head, weighing fear of job loss against instinct to help. Yet when the moment arrived, Brian froze. His smirk of amusement earlier had vanished, but had it been replaced with regret or guilt? No. He bore only the weight of his own inaction. Marcus found himself wondering how many times Brian had witnessed smaller crises in these aisles and chosen to look away. How many lives had his indifference touched without his awareness, Marcus's gaze shifted to Travis once more. He watched the attendant's fingers flex nervously at his sides. A memory stirred in Marcus's mind of his daughter Zoe, who had fallen off her bicycle and cried for help. He had rushed to her side without hesitation. She had learned from him that vulnerability deserved a response. Now he felt that same vulnerability coursing through his throat and filling the cabin with an unspoken challenge. He stood not just as a victim of neglect, but as a witness to a breakdown of trust. In that gaze, he tried to convey more than accusation. He tried to offer Travis a chance to reclaim his humanity. Travis's eyes flicked upward at Marcus's unyielding stare. He swallowed hard and opened his mouth as if to say something, but the words died on his tongue. He cleared his throat and attempted a cursory apology. "I am sorry, Mr. Reed. I did not realize the severity of your condition," but the words fell flat. They lacked sincerity and substance. Marcus felt a pang of frustration that such a simple phrase could not bridge the gulf between intention and impact. He realized that apologies without action were like empty seats on a plane meant to hold safety gear. Brian Cho finally shifted from his corner. He stepped into the aisle with hands outstretched as though to offer help, but then hesitated. His voice trembled as he murmured, "I should have acted sooner," but again his admission felt incomplete. It was a confession without remedy. Marcus noticed that Brian's gaze avoided direct eye contact, lingering instead on the aisle floor. He could almost hear Brian's thoughts. What if I lose my job? What if the airline blames me? What if I ruin my career? But in that hesitation, Brian forfeited his moment to do right. Marcus felt the whirlwind of emotions swirl inside him. Relief at his own recovery mingled with anger at the crew's indifference and gratitude toward Derek Sullivan's intervention. He placed a hand over his heart as the adrenaline ebbed and let himself sit back down. Someone offered him a glass of water, and he accepted it with a nod of thanks before swallowing in measured sips. The cool liquid soothed his throat and grounded his racing thoughts. He recognized then that the true crisis had been larger than an allergic reaction. It had been the refusal of those entrusted with his care to see him as more than a disruption. Around him, passengers continued to record the scene on their phones. Phones hovered in the air like silent jurors, capturing every nuance of expression. Marcus understood that in this age of instant documentation, indifference would no longer remain hidden. The glare of social media would spotlight every moment of omission. That realization brought a strange comfort. If the crew could hide behind procedure, they could not hide behind darkness. Their actions or lack of action would be broadcast beyond these cabin walls and held up to public scrutiny. In another part of the cabin, Marco Lewis leaned against the jump seat and exchanged a glance with Malik Thompson. Malik's eyes were wide with concern, but also determination. He had seen the injustice and chosen to witness. Marco had reported Travis's behavior months ago, but fear had silenced him until now. He told Marcus quietly afterward that he had spoken up once, but was warned to stay silent. Now, seeing the scene unfold, knowing that someone finally cared, he felt a shift within himself. He realized that silence was more contagious than any illness and harder to cure. Marcus reflected on the concept of moral courage. He remembered reading about bystander effect in psychology journals and thinking it a remote academic issue. Now he had lived it. He had experienced how easy it was for individuals to turn away, to rationalize neglect, and to prioritize self-interest over basic empathy. Yet he also witnessed how one person's decisive action could disrupt that pattern and ignite a chain reaction. He glanced at Derek, who packed up the emergency kit with practiced care. Derek's calm competence had inspired confidence in everyone present and reminded them of what duty truly meant. As Flight 427 cruised onward toward its destination, Marcus resolved that this would not be the end of the story. He would use his voice to amplify the lesson learned at 35,000 feet. He would advocate for mandatory training to ensure that flight crews recognized the human faces behind every seat number. He would challenge the airline industry to bridge the gap between procedure and compassion. The moment of indifference had left a bitter residue in him, but also a resilient spark that refused to let this injustice pass unanswered. With that determination, Marcus pressed a button on the armrest call panel. He asked the flight attendant for a pad of paper and a pen. When Travis Mulligan appeared at his side, Marcus requested a private conversation. As the attendant nodded, Marcus felt a flicker of hope that connection might still be possible. Even those who failed once could choose to learn. Even those who refused to see him as a person could be reminded of their duty to care. The journey ahead would test more than his capacity to endure physical crisis. It would test his ability to transform indifference into meaningful change. The cabin of Flight 427 had transformed from a place of serene comfort into an arena of moral reckoning. Every passenger, once cloaked in anonymity, now occupied a pivotal role in a shared drama unfolding at 35,000 feet. Phones hovered in midair. Cameras trained on the aisle where Marcus Reed stood, supported by Derek Sullivan. The hush that followed Derek's intervention crackled with latent energy, an unspoken question passing through every pair of eyes. What would they do if they were next faced with a crisis? Malik Thompson's heartbeat thundered in his ears. Only moments ago, he had watched in helpless confusion as Marcus clutched his throat and Travis Mulligan dismissed his pleas. Then he had stepped forward in that brief window of hesitation. Now, seeing Marcus alive, Malik felt both pride and shame. Pride that he had tried to help, and shame that he had waited for permission before acting. He scanned the faces around him, searching for any sign of judgment or support. Some passengers averted their gaze, unwilling to meet his eyes, as if they feared his awareness might expose their own inaction. Others held their phones like shields, mediating their comfort through the lens of a screen instead of offering direct assistance. Across the aisle, a middle-aged woman in a tailored suit fidgeted with her purse. She had been engrossed in an economic forecast report when the commotion began. Now her hands trembled as she reopened the clasp and closed it again, torn between the impulse to stand and help and the fear of stepping outside social norms. Marcus had once taught her in a workshop about the importance of adaptive leadership. She now realized that theory could crumble in practice when faced with real human suffering. Her mind raced through excuses she had prided herself on, once concerns about protocol, worries about being wrong, respect for authority. None of those excuses felt valid anymore. Further back, Henry Carrington sat rigidly in his seat, a prominent investor and frequent flyer. He was accustomed to the deference of flight crews. He had watched Brian Cho's smirk transform into regret. He had seen Travis's confident posture wilt under collective outrage. Yet he held himself still. He had argued fiercely in boardrooms over matters of billions of dollars. He had directed teams through crises that threatened global markets. But now he felt paralyzed by a simpler dilemma, whether to intervene in the safety of a fellow human being. He replayed the events in his mind, each moment stretching out like an eternity. I should have said something, he thought. If I had just stood up and demanded action. In the jump seat near the galley, Marco Lewis kept his focus trained on the emergency kit that Derek Sullivan had returned to the overhead bin. Marco had torn himself between loyalty to his colleagues and the moral imperative to help. He remembered reporting Travis's dismissive attitude to management months before, only to be told that the incident would be documented, but no further action would be taken. Fear of retaliation had silenced him then. Now he wondered what silence had cost him and countless others before Marcus. He realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else mattered more than fear. The flight attendants, Travis Mulligan and Brian Cho, hovered at the margins of this moral battleground. Travis's uniform was pristine once more, but the crisp lines could not mask the tension in his shoulders. He had clung to procedure as a safeguard, convinced that adherence to rules would shield him from blame. Now he saw that rules without empathy were pointless. He caught Marcus's eye and felt a wave of remorse. Marcus's gaze was steady, neither accusatory nor forgiving, but filled with expectation. Travis understood in that moment that apology meant little without a promise of change. Brian Cho's guilt was less visible but equally potent. He stood behind the service cart, arms crossed over his chest. He stared at the floor, then at the ceiling, unable to meet any gaze. When a fellow passenger, a young couple, leaned toward him to ask if he could offer an explanation, Brian stammered. I tried to stop him, but Travis insisted. The couple exchanged glances, disappointed, and returned their attention to Marcus. The couple's disinterest stung Brian more than the angry whispers devolving into shouts. He realized that by not acting decisively, he had betrayed not only Marcus, but also his own integrity. The cabin crew's indecision rippled outward, intensifying the conflict swirling through the cabin. Passengers were no longer mere bystanders. The line between observer and participant had blurred. An older man 2 rows back rose unsteadily to his feet, but immediately sat back down when a flight attendant signaled that he remain seated. The gesture felt like a command to prioritize order over compassion. Many passengers complied, convinced that authority must be obeyed even when authority had failed. In that moment, Derek Sullivan became more than an EMT. He became a catalyst for moral awakening. His actions reminded everyone that individual agency could override hierarchy. As Derek spoke quietly to Marcus, assuring continuity of care, murmurs of approval and relief rippled through the cabin. Passengers began to lean into their humanity. A woman 3 rows back stood and offered her scarf for Marcus to wrap around his shoulders. Another passenger handed Malik a bottle of water for the hero in the hoodie. Small acts of kindness multiplied, a quiet rebellion against the earlier wave of indifference. The shift was palpable. Phones lowered. Conversations resumed with hushed tones, but filled with solidarity. Passengers exchanged knowing glances, silently acknowledging a shared lesson. Trust had been broken and repaired within the span of a single crisis. But the repair was still fragile. Some passengers kept their arms crossed, unsure if their empathy would hold when the next crisis emerged. Others made mental notes, vowing to act without hesitation in the future. Marcus watched all of this unfold and felt a mixture of gratitude and resignation. Gratitude for those who had stepped forward, and resignation that so many had hesitated. He understood that fear of social judgment could be as paralyzing as fear of physical harm. He thought of his daughter Zoe and hoped that her generation would learn from this. He resolved to share with her both the story of Derek's courage and the tale of those who had stood still. He wanted her to understand that humanity was not a passive inheritance, but an active choice. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and unwavering. He informed everyone that the seatbelt sign would remain on for the next phase of the flight and thanked them for their patience. Marcus heard the underlying tension in the captain's tone, an acknowledgement that the cabin atmosphere had shifted into a new reality. This flight was no longer simply a journey from point A to point B. It had become an example of how individual choices could create collective impact. In the dimly lit cabin, shadows played across the faces of every person on board. The lights reflected in tears in some eyes and steely determination in others. The crisis had revealed both the worst and best of human nature. It had tested the bonds of community and stretched them to the limit. It had forced each person to confront the uncomfortable question, would I stand by or stand up? Marco Lewis approached Marcus and Derek with hesitant steps. He offered Derek a nod of respect and then turned to Marcus, voice trembling. Mr. Reed, I am sorry I should have acted sooner. Marcus met his gaze and offered a small, forgiving smile. Thank you for saying that. Marco's shoulders relaxed slightly, and he nodded again, a signal that he would carry this moment forward as a lesson. Malik Thompson slid into the aisle and offered Marcus the water he had fetched earlier. Marcus took it and said, Thank you, Malik. The boy's face lit up with pride and relief. In that exchange, Marcus felt a spark of hope that the next generation would be braver than the last. As the cabin settled into a subdued stillness, Marcus pulled out his journal. He penned a new entry. Witnessing in action is complicity. Courage creates change. He closed the journal and looked around at the faces illuminated by the soft reading lights. Each person had a choice to make. Some had chosen compassion. Others had faltered. But all had been drawn into the moment. Marcus stood and raised his voice just enough to carry through the hush. Thank you all for being here today. Your actions matter whether you realized it in this moment or not. The cabin echoed with applause, a gesture of collective solidarity. The journey toward London would continue. But this flight would never be the same for those on board. Each passenger carried a renewed awareness of their power to shape outcomes, to protect one another, and to break the silence when action was needed. A tense hush fell over cabin of Flight 427 as Derek Sullivan pushed past vacuum of inaction. He had recognized signs of anaphylaxis the split second he heard Marcus Reed's weak plea. Derek's years as an emergency medical technician had trained him to move without hesitation when seconds mattered most. Now, as he strode down narrow aisle, he scanned faces in first-class section, looking only for the red emergency kit mounted above seat row 4. His uniform, a navy polo and slacks, lent him the quiet authority he needed to claim that kit without question. He barely registered Travis Mulligan's startled expression as he surged forward. With a swift motion, Derek yanked open overhead bin door, then retrieved bright red box marked Emergency Response. He set it down on Marcus's tray table with a firm thud that echoed through cabin. The kit bore symbols for an epinephrine auto-injector oxygen mask and various bandages. Passengers leaned forward in their seats, cameras raised, yet no one dared cross Derek's path. He pulled out the injector and removed its cap, then knelt beside Marcus. In that moment, Marcus felt pure relief flood his senses as he watched needle poised and ready. Derek held the device steady and spoke in calm, low voice. Marcus, you are going to be okay. I need you to stay still for me. Marcus gripped Derek's sleeve with trembling fingers. He tasted metal tang of adrenaline and grit from cabin carpet under his palm. Every breath was sharp, but possible now. Derek pressed injector tip into Marcus's thigh and pushed until he heard quiet click. A second later, Marcus felt warmth blossom where needle pierced skin. He closed his eyes and let himself breathe deep. Air flowed freely as epinephrine relieved constricted airways. His heartbeat slowed to a more measured pace. Derek pressed on Marcus's back in a gentle count of 10, then stepped back. Marcus sat up straighter, supporting himself with hands braced on armrests. Passengers around them exhaled as one. Some voices softly offered words of encouragement. "You are going to be fine, sir." Others spoke into phones describing what they had witnessed. The chamber returned to a semblance of order, yet it felt changed somehow. A few moments ago, crisis had held everyone in stasis. Now, crisis had been met with swift action. Derek gathered the kit and closed its lid, then stood and looked directly at Travis Mulligan. His gaze carried question and reproach without a single word. Travis swallowed and shifted uneasily under that silent challenge. Marcus swallowed twice and managed a raspy voice. "Thank you, Derek." He paused, gathering strength, and continued, "I am grateful." Derek nodded once and replied, "You did great. I am just glad I was here." As Marcus steadied his breathing, he felt hollowness in his chest, gradually replaced by clarity. He surveyed cabin around him. The overhead lights glowed softly and the scent of coffee wafted from the galley. Flight attendees dusted off uniforms and adjusted ties, yet their eyes told stories of awareness and accountability. Marcus recognized that those alone moments of crisis had forced people to confront gravity of their choices. He reached into suit jacket pocket and produced medical alert card, then held it out. Derek reviewed it and affirmed, "That is all we need for now. I will stay close until your breathing stabilizes." Derek crouched down again and placed hand lightly on Marcus's shoulder, checking for steady pulse. Marcus noticed a small twitch in Derek's freckled forehead, signaling his caution. He found himself studying Derek's face as if seeking confirmation that he had not just hallucinated life-saving intervention. As cabin tension eased, Derek returned kit to overhead bin, then straightened and retrieved water from a passing beverage cart. He handed cup to Marcus, who accepted with gratitude. He raised it to lips and swallowed deeply, savoring cool liquid sliding down his throat. He closed his eyes and breathed again, deep and even. Tasting clarity. That simple cup of water now felt significant. He thought about how vulnerable he had been only moments before and how differently things could have ended without Derek's action. Travis Mulligan approached with renewed purpose. He kneeled beside Marcus and said, "Mr. Reed, I apologize for earlier. I should have responded immediately." He extended handkerchief for perspiration and spoke earnestly. "I did not understand severity of situation." Marcus nodded once, acknowledging sincerity. He recognized genuine remorse in Travis's voice, but also knew words carried weight only when translated into better choices. He said, "Travis, thank you for apologizing. Let us work together to ensure nothing like this happens again." Brian Cho emerged from galley and carried medical documentation form. He had regained composure and now approached with pen in hand. His demeanor was respectful and contrite. Brian said, "Mr. Reed, I will file incident report right now and make sure crew follows protocol. I will also review actions with my colleagues." Marcus nodded, accepting gesture while understanding that form alone would not change culture. He said, "Brian, thank you for taking that step. I look forward to seeing tangible improvements." Derek stood back and observed subtle shift in cabin dynamics. He had interrupted velocity of indifference with urgency of care. That moment crystallized concept of moral duty for everyone on board. He caught eye of young passenger Malik Thompson, who had stood in support earlier. Malik offered thumbs up, a gesture of solidarity that made Derek nod in recognition. Derek patted Marcus's shoulder and said, "I will alert cockpit to request medical clearance upon landing. They need to know your condition." Marcus appreciated foresight and replied, "Yes, please keep them informed." Across aisle, Henry Carrington watched proceedings with newfound respect for those who acted. He thought about his own role in the moment and felt remorse for passivity. He leaned toward Marcus and said, "If you need anything else, just let me know." Marcus looked at Carrington and saw willingness to help and empathy in his eyes. He offered nod of acceptance. In that exchange, Marcus realized that crisis can forge connections. People become more human when vulnerability flares so visibly. Captain Lucas Beck's voice then came over intercom advising cabin that medical situation had been resolved and flight would proceed as planned. He thanked passengers and crew for cooperation. Marcus listened to calm professionalism in that voice and felt ripple of relief. He had placed trust in systems that nearly failed him, yet regained trust in individuals who chose to step forward. The captain had great responsibility to every traveler in cabin. Next steps would include a detailed report and decisions on landing protocol. Marcus looked at Derek again and offered invitation to sit. Derek moved into seat across cabin, leaning comfortably. They spoke quietly about details that Marcus wanted to relay. Marcus asked time since injection, a question scientifically precise. Derek checked watch and said about 5 minutes earlier, "Your vitals stable now, but we will continue monitoring." He asked about Marcus's conference notes. Marcus shared his tablet and pointed out key slides that would benefit from improved accessibility features. Their conversation shifted from near tragedy to mission-driven collaboration. Passengers settled back into routine. Some drifted to sleep, while others flipped through magazines. Cabin lights lowered to create restful ambiance, yet beneath surface murmurs persisted. Conversations about bystander effect and moral courage drifted from lips of passengers. Mutual curiosity about next phase of journey sparked community spirit that had been dormant earlier in flight. Marcus sensed collective transformation. They were more than tourists now. They were witnesses evolving into advocates for better crew training and passenger rights. Marcus reflected on his own journey from helplessness to agency. He recalled internal struggle when Travis first dismissed him. He felt pride in his body that had responded to injector and pride in Derek, whose competence saved life. Yet he felt responsibility as leader to amplify lesson learned at 35,000 feet. He opened his journal and wrote words that felt essential. Mid-air crisis demands mid-air compassion. He closed journal and tucked it into pocket. He would speak about this in London, not only about digital equity, but also about human equity. He reached for tablet and drafted a quick message to communications team at NovusLink Technologies, requesting they prepare a press release about in-flight medical protocol advocacy. He summarized events succinctly and included lessons on accountability and compassion. He added a note that he would share personal account in a thought leadership column. As he tapped send, Marcus felt empowerment pulse through him. He had turned crisis into platform. He had transformed victimhood into voice. In that moment, the cabin felt alive with potential. First-class seat suddenly felt like stage where human dignity had been defended. He turned to Travis and Brian and said, "Let us make sure every flight crew learns from this." Both attendants nodded solemnly. He then turned to Derek and said, "Thank you for being present and for being willing to act." Derek shrugged modestly and said, "I did what anyone should do." But Marcus knew truth. Not everyone would act under those pressures. Some would hesitate. Some would hide behind procedure and fear. Derek had chosen differently. As Flight 427 glided onward through night sky, Marcus looked out window at veil of stars spread across canvas of black. He felt kinship with each starlight, a connection of human acts of courage shining across distance. His own story was anchored in that moment of rescue. It would guide him forward in leadership and life. Marcus Reed sat upright and felt the solidity of the seat beneath him. His pulse had steadied and oxygen filled his chest without effort. He reached into his leather briefcase and retrieved a manila folder stamped with the seal of the Federal Aviation Administration. The edges of the folder were crisp, and he recognized the weight of its contents. He knew that when Travis Mulligan handed it to him before takeoff, Travis assumed it contained routine paperwork. No one expected a federal indictment to emerge at cruising altitude. He cleared his throat and then pressed the small button on his armrest to activate the cabin microphone. A hush fell across the first-class cabin as passengers sensed his intent. Marcus spoke in a clear, calm voice that carried without strain. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for interrupting our journey, but I have important information to share. At this moment, I am serving notice of a federal investigation into negligence and discrimination by the crew on this flight." Eyes widened and phones rose once more. The manila folder split open in Marcus's hands, and he held up a letter addressed to Captain Lucas Beck. In careful, measured tones, he read aloud the charges: civil negligence discrimination in violation of federal safety standards and interference with a passenger's right to medical attention. He paused to let the words sink in. The cabin felt smaller as the gravity of the moment settled over every person on board. Travis Mulligan's face drained of a color. He must have understood that this was beyond any routine safety report. Brian Cho's hand shook as he gripped the back of a seat. Henry Carrington straightened in his chair and exchanged a glance with the passenger beside him. The usual hierarchy of first-class etiquette dissolved. For a moment, the plane became a courtroom suspended above the clouds. Marcus continued speaking, and his voice gained strength with each sentence. He described how the crew's initial dismissal of his serious allergic reaction had endangered his life. He noted that despite his repeated requests for epinephrine, the crew had prioritized discomfort over duty. He referred to specific timelines and responses that would form the basis of legal testimony once law enforcement boarded after landing. Passengers leaned forward. Some adjusted their seatbelts as if preparing for a trial. Malik Thompson pressed record on his phone with determination. He knew his video footage would serve as critical evidence. Marco Lewis stood nearby, ready to corroborate Marcus's account. Their presence offered reassurance that multiple witnesses would testify to the crew's misconduct. The intercom crackled to life as Captain Lucas Beck's voice spoke with measured authority. "This is your captain," Captain Beck said. "We have been advised of the notice of investigation and will comply fully upon landing. I ask that you remain seated and follow crew instructions." The calm professionalism in his tone contrasted sharply with the tension radiating through the cabin. A woman in a tailored suit raised her hand hesitantly. "Mr. Reed," she said, "I appreciate your courage, but what does this mean for the rest of our flight? The letter states inquiry after landing, but what protections do we have right now?" Marcus met her gaze and replied, "We are fully within our rights to demand proper medical care and fair treatment under federal law. That means any future requests must be honored without delay." Travis Mulligan swallowed and then spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Reed, I understand the severity now. I will ensure any request you have is met immediately." He glanced at Brian Cho as if seeking affirmation. Brian nodded and said, "I deeply regret my hesitation." Marcus acknowledged their words with a firm nod. "Thank you for your cooperation. Moving forward, our focus is on safety and respect for every passenger's health." Henry Carrington rose to his feet and cleared his throat. "If I may," he said, "I represent several investors in aviation health initiatives. We are prepared to assist in reviewing crew training protocols and funding improved emergency response measures aboard aircraft." He laid a business card on Marcus's tray table. "I want to ensure this does not happen again." Marcus recognized Carrington's genuine offer as an unexpected ally. The cabin buzzed with renewed energy. Conversations began to flow about policy changes and advocacy. Passengers exchanged ideas about passenger rights and best practices for medical emergencies in flight. The collective engagement transformed the cabin from a site of crisis to a forum for constructive change. Marcus felt the surge of possibility. He had turned a perilous situation into a catalyst for industry reform. He closed the manila folder and placed it gently on the tray table. He looked around at the faces illuminated by reading lights. Each person had borne witness to a turning point. He said, Thank you all for your attention and support. Today, we have demonstrated that accountability transcends altitude. We will ensure that our voices echo long after we land. He tapped the microphone one last time to deactivate it. Captain Beck's voice returned on the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your cooperation. We will be descending into our landing pattern. Shortly, law enforcement will board upon arrival. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. The announcement offered closure to the formal process, but did not diminish the impact of the moment. Marcus Reed leaned back and exhaled slowly. The manila folder now rested unopened beside him as a symbol of authority reclaimed. He reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved his personal journal. He wrote a single line: "Justice knows no altitude." He closed the journal and tucked it away. As the plane began its descent, Marcus experienced a profound sense of purpose. He had transformed an act of neglect into a movement for change and justice at 35,000 feet. Climax justice in the air. The cabin lights brightened as Flight 427 began its final descent. Passengers returned from their private thoughts to the reality unfolding before them. Captain Lucas Beck's voice came clearly over the intercom. "Thank you for your patience." Ladies and gentlemen, as we prepare to land, we have received confirmation that law enforcement will be meeting us at the gate. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. A low murmur of anticipation rippled through the cabin. Marcus Reed sat upright, his senses heightened, as if he could feel the ground below drawing nearer, bringing resolution to this mid-air trial. Travis Mulligan stood at the front of the cabin, uniform neat but posture tense. Brian Cho remained by the service cart, his eyes fixed on the aisle as passengers whispered. The crew, who had once embodied indifference, now stood at the edge of accountability. Passengers shifted in their seats, leaning forward to witness the arrival of justice. Marcus watched the expressions around him, the mixture of relief and vindication etched on each face. The cabin had become more than a place of transit. It had become a courtroom where silence was no longer an option. A member of law enforcement appeared at the door of the jet bridge. A uniformed air marshal stepped into the cabin, followed by two federal officers in dark suits. One officer carried a case file that matched the manila folder Marcus had wielded earlier. The sight of badges and earpieces brought a hush so complete it felt like the pause before a verdict. The marshal nodded at Captain Beck and then made eye contact with Marcus as if to acknowledge his role as the catalyst for change. Captain Beck activated the cabin microphone again. "Ladies and gentlemen, the authorities are now on board. Please remain seated and follow their instructions." The marshal's deep voice came through the speakers. "You, Travis Mulligan, step forward and remove your name tag." Travis hesitated, his breath shallow, then unclipped the polished metal badge bearing his name. He extended both hands and allowed the marshal to affix handcuffs. A soft click echoed in the enclosed space. A stunned silence followed until the marshal continued. "Young Brian Cho, you are also under investigation for failure to administer medical care in accordance with federal regulations." Brian's shoulders slumped as he slid the pen from his breast pocket and set it on the cart. He lifted his hands for the cuffs and forced a nod. The passengers watched, transfixed, as the two crew members were escorted toward the rear of the plane. Every step they took under this weight of accountability resonated like a judgment rendered against apathy. Henry Carrington rose to his feet and met the officers in the aisle. He offered them his business card and explained his willingness to facilitate an immediate review of training protocols. The marshal took the card and nodded with appreciation. Passengers behind Carrington murmured gratitude. The sense of solidarity blossomed into applause that spread row by row until the cabin filled with supportive clapping and occasional cheers. Cameras lifted again, but now to record a moment of communal triumph rather than scandal. The marshal addressed Marcus Reed directly. "You have served notice and provided testimony in the form of your own account and witness statements. We will secure the necessary reports and ensure appropriate action is taken." Marcus nodded and replied, "Thank you for acting swiftly. We all deserve to feel safe at any altitude." He felt the stares of fellow passengers, but instead of judgment, he sensed respect. He recognized that this moment would be remembered as the point at which passengers reclaimed their agency. Captain Beck's voice returned once more. "Thank you to all passengers for your cooperation. We will be on the ground momentarily. Please remain seated until the aircraft comes to a complete stop." The engine's rumble softened as the wheels contacted the runway, and friction brought the plane to a smooth taxi. Through the windows, Marcus watched runway lights blur into streaks, the same world he had left behind, now welcoming a new chapter. As Flight 427 taxied toward the gate, Derek Sullivan emerged from his jump seat and approached Marcus with a respectful nod. "You handled that with composure," he said quietly. Marcus replied, "I could not have done it alone. Thank you for being there." Derek patted his shoulder and stepped back to let the officers complete their procedures. Malik Thompson leaned over from his seat. "You were amazing," he whispered. Marcus smiled and said, "You were too. You gave the first sign of support." Malik beamed and ducked back into his seat. Marco Lewis returned to his jump seat near the galley and exchanged a nod with Marcus. His gesture signified a pledge to continue speaking up, even when others hesitated. Marcus felt gratitude for every person who had chosen courage over comfort. He realized that heroes wore many faces, and that in the confined space of an airplane cabin, ordinary people could become agents of justice. Through the cabin door, the sounds of ground crews and airport announcements drifted in. The realization that gravity would soon reclaim them brought a sense of closure. But Marcus also felt a spark of something new. He imagined stories circulating of Flight 427 and its unique mid-air trial. He pictured headlines highlighting passenger solidarity, crew accountability, and the power of collective witness. He knew that this would become a case study in leadership seminars, a testament to the fact that accountability transcends altitude. Captain Beck's voice came quieter now as the plane stopped at the gate. "Doors will open shortly. Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is turned off." Marcus reached for his journal and recorded a final line of this chapter. "Courage is contagious, and justice can take flight." He closed the journal and placed it gently in his briefcase. The seatbelt sign clicked off, and passengers began to unzip bags and prepare to disembark. The two crew members under arrest emerged at the rear, surrounded by officers. Some passengers turned to offer nods or handshakes. Others took deep breaths to steady trembling emotions. As the line formed, Henry Carrington stepped forward to hold open the exit for the officers escorting Travis and Brian. He looked over his shoulder at Marcus and raised his eyebrows in a gesture of solidarity. Marcus returned the gesture with a firm nod. On the jet bridge, Marcus paused to take a last look into the cabin. The overhead lights cast long shadows on the carpeted floor, and the empty seats seemed to hum with the echoes of events just past. He closed his eyes and breathed in the recycled air one final time. He felt gratitude for life and for every voice that had refused to remain silent. He stepped off into the bright gate area flanked by uniformed officers and led by Captain Beck. Reporters and airport security converged, their questions immediate and insistent. Flashing cameras and hurried footsteps greeted him. Marcus paused and raised his hand for silence. Phones lowered and cameras aimed at him. He spoke with measured calm. Thank you all for witnessing the events on Flight 427 today. Our collective courage has set a precedent. Airlines must train crews to treat every passenger with respect and respond swiftly to medical emergencies. With your help, we will ensure that safety extends beyond protocol to real compassion. His words resonated through the terminal and were absorbed by every person present. As he walked toward the exit, Derek Sullivan joined him and said, "We did it." Marcus looked at Derek and replied, "Yes. But this is only the beginning." He turned and faced the throng of Media One flight at 35,000 feet will not solve every problem, but it can spark change. He smiled faintly and stepped through the doors into the bustle of the airport. The world outside felt louder and more vivid than before. He knew that justice had taken flight and that their story would travel far beyond the skies. As Flight 427 docked at Gate A7, the atmosphere inside transformed from tension to an urgent buzz of conversation. News of the in-flight crisis had spread rapidly through social media channels. Within minutes of landing, passengers began sharing first-hand accounts and video clips under the hashtag #SpeakUp@3,000 feet. The cabin felt like the epicenter of a digital wildfire as notifications chimed on phones and screens glowed with real-time updates. Marcus Reed stepped off the jet bridge into the terminal concourse, flanked by Captain Lucas Beck and Derek Sullivan. But around them, a crowd had already formed. Reporters pressed forward, microphones extended, cameras rolling. The fallout from their extraordinary mid-air courtroom had begun. At the center of the terminal floor, a large display screen flickered to life. A news anchor's steady voice narrated footage captured by Malik Thompson from his seat. The grainy handheld video showed Travis Mulligan dismissing Marcus Reed's pleas for help. It cut to Derek Sullivan rushing forward, retrieving the emergency kit and administering epinephrine. The video ended with applause from fellow passengers. The anchor introduced a breaking segment, Justice at Altitude, and invited a panel of aviation experts to weigh in. Within seconds, an online poll popped up under the live stream, asking viewers whether airlines had adequate medical training protocols. Thousands of responses flooded in, most condemning the crew's initial indifference. The uproar reached a crescendo when prominent tech publication Digital Frontier ran an op-ed titled "A CEO Chokes," while crew laughs. Minutes later, he grounds the airline. The article praised Marcus Reed's composure and Derek Sullivan's swift action. It also lambasted airline management for failing to enforce rigorous emergency response training. Within hours, LinkedIn feeds filled with calls for mandatory medical instruction for flight attendants. Industry insiders predicted that compliance regulations would be updated by the Federal Aviation Administration. Forums and chat groups debated every nuance of the incident, from passenger rights to crew accountability. The story had captured the public imagination. It drew in voices from healthcare professionals, politicians, and everyday travelers who shared similar near-miss experiences. Airline headquarters in another city convened an emergency meeting that afternoon. At the center, long conference tables sat executive leadership surrounded by legal counsel and public relations experts. Screens around the room replayed the incident footage alongside social media statistics, showing tens of thousands of mentions in multiple countries. A crisis management specialist recommended issuing a formal apology to Marcus Reed and passengers on Flight 427. Legal advisors advised on potential liabilities and regulatory inquiries. Human resources representatives drafted internal memos to remind staff of the importance of empathy and protocol adherence. By evening, a statement was posted on the company's official website. It expressed regret for the delay in medical care provided to a passenger with a known allergy. It pledged to review training procedures and implement enhancements within 90 days. Across social media platforms, public opinion was divided between outrage and cautious optimism. Some users condemned the airline as emblematic of a broader corporate indifference to human needs. Others praised the CEO of NovusLink Technologies for using his public platform to instigate meaningful change. A documentary filmmaker tweeted, "Are we witnessing a turning point in airline safety, or just another viral reaction culture will decide?" Hashtags like "in-flight justice" and "Chihuahua, passengers have power" trended alongside "speak up at 3,000 feet." Comments poured in from around the world. A nursing student in Sydney shared her own near miss with an allergic passenger on a domestic carrier last month. A retired flight attendant in Toronto posted an essay urging colleagues to treat every medical request as an emergency. The conversation transcended national boundaries and time zones. Marcus attended a press conference organized at the gate area. Captain Lucas Beck introduced him as both a passenger on Flight 427 and an advocate for aviation safety. Cameras clicked as Marcus approached the podium. He thanked his fellow travelers for their solidarity and reiterated his commitment to ensuring that no one else would suffer in silence. He announced that he would be launching a nonprofit initiative called Voices in Flight. The organization would partner with airlines and health professionals to develop interactive e-learning modules for cabin crews. Crowdfunding links displayed on large screens offered the public an opportunity to contribute to the project. Within minutes, the donation portal received hundreds of pledges. Meanwhile, Derek Sullivan provided formal statements for the record. He described his background as an EMT and expressed hope that his example would inspire others to overcome fear and follow their duty to help. Malik Thompson's video interview played on screens at multiple news outlets. The teenage witness spoke of the moral responsibility we all carry as human beings to protect one another. His calm presence belied his youth and resonated with viewers who remembered times when they too had hesitated in a crisis. Each participant's testimony reinforced the narrative that individual action can disrupt systemic failures. In the days that followed, industry regulators announced an inquiry into the incident. They requested reports from the airline on crew training records, medical kit maintenance, and incident response protocols. The Federal Aviation Administration sent inspectors to audit training materials and observe staff drills. Pilots and flight attendants across the network received mandatory refresher courses on anaphylaxis recognition and passenger communication. Airlines worldwide took note. A major international carrier announced plans to integrate real-time telemedicine support on long-haul flights. Another carrier committed to equipping all crew with portable emergency kits and personal medical alert devices. The ripple effect from one mid-air trial was transforming industry practices at a global level. The social media dialogue evolved from reactive outrage to constructive collaboration. Virtual town hall meetings convened aviation experts, passengers, and advocates. They exchanged ideas on best practices for medical transparency on board and explored technology solutions, such as wearable alert bracelets that would notify crew of passenger allergies. A coalition of nonprofit organizations joined Marcus's Voices in Flight initiative. They offered to share their expertise in curriculum development and mental health support for crew members who faced high-stress environments. The movement harnessed collective energy toward tangible outcomes rather than remaining a transient online storm. Meanwhile, the airline's stock experienced fluctuations as investors digested potential reputational damage and compliance costs. Financial analysts debated whether the long-term brand impact would outweigh short-term losses. Some predicted a decline in consumer confidence if journals of misconduct continued to surface. Others believed that the airline's swift response and policy overhaul would enhance its reputation as a passenger-centric carrier. Newsletters and blogs tracked the story's progression under the tagline, "From Crisis to Change." Industry podcasts dedicated entire episodes to dissecting the Flight 427 saga. interviewing aviation lawyers and safety consultants. Marcus Reed's LinkedIn post detailing the incident and calling for systemic reform garnered tens of thousands of engagements. He shared personal reflections on vulnerability leadership and the importance of active witnessing. His words struck a chord with executives in various sectors who saw parallels between airline crew protocols and corporate crisis management in their own organizations. Companies outside aviation approached his team to explore cross-sector applications for emergency training and empathy-driven service standards. The conversation expanded beyond cabin safety to broader themes of moral courage and collective responsibility. Within 2 weeks of the incident, dozens of airlines had publicly revised their medical emergency procedures. Regulatory bodies issued updated guidance documents and recommended best practices for cabin crews. Training academies incorporated interactive simulations featuring real-time decision-making under pressure. Passengers began to demand greater transparency about in-flight medical capabilities when booking tickets. Travel bloggers wrote guides on how to advocate for one's own health during air travel. A grassroots movement was in full swing, catalyzed by one man's refusal to accept silence as safety. Back at NovusLink Technologies, Marcus convened a strategy session to plan the next phase of Voices in Flight. Team members brainstormed educational outreach campaigns targeted at frequent flyers and online communities. They drafted partnerships with airline unions and medical associations. Marcus emphasized the need to maintain momentum beyond the viral moment. He reminded his colleagues that real change required sustained effort. He referenced the lessons learned at 35,000 feet about the power of community and the importance of leadership rooted in empathy. On social media, 1 month after the incident, a follow-up survey showed that over 80% of passengers who had flown since reported experiencing more attentive medical support. Flight attendants shared anecdotes of early recognition of symptoms and proactive communication with passengers. Testimonials flooded the Voices in Flight website from people who felt safer and more confident. The movement that began as a moment of crisis had evolved into an enduring shift in the culture of air travel. Through it all, Marcus Reed remained grounded. He continued to travel for speaking engagements and charity events, but always carried with him the memory of Flight 427's cabin. In interviews, he described the incident as a clarion call for every person to find their voice and speak up when it matters most. The social uproar that followed had been more than a media spectacle. It had been a catalyst for industry and societal transformation. The air we breathe at 35,000 feet now carried the promise of compassion as much as oxygen. As Marcus Reed stepped into the bright bustle of the terminal, he felt a quiet hum of momentum beneath his skin. The adrenaline that had rushed through his veins during the crisis had given way to a lingering awareness of purpose. He moved through the crowd with measured steps, his gaze steady on the path ahead, but his mind drifted back to the fragile stillness of the cabin just hours before. In that confined space, he had faced both vulnerability and vindication. Now, on solid ground, he recognized that the true journey was only beginning. Outside the gate area, he paused by a row of windows overlooking the tarmac. Flight 427 sat there like a silent monument to change, its metallic hull reflecting the glow of terminal lights. Ground crews bustled around the aircraft, whispering updates and securing doors. The engines slumbered, but the energy of transformation lingered in every rivet and panel. Marcus placed a hand against the glass and imagined the story of that flight radiating outward across the world. He thought of every passenger on board and the personal reckoning each had experienced. They had witnessed a failure of duty and then the triumph of compassion. That collective arc would reverberate far beyond the runway. Marcus looked down at his reflection in the window. He observed the crease of determination at the corner of his mouth and the calm resolve in his eyes. He felt the weight of responsibility settle more firmly on his shoulders. In the moments after the crisis, grateful passengers had offered gestures of kindness and support. They had shared phone numbers and business cards and even offered to donate to the initiative he had announced. Their goodwill crystallized into an obligation for him to honor their trust with tangible action. He stepped away from the window and found a quiet corner near a cluster of charging stations. He retrieved his journal from his briefcase and flipped to the page where he had written, "Justice knows no altitude." Beneath that, he had penned, "Courage is contagious, and justice can take flight." He paused to absorb those words. They felt less like observations and more like commitments sealed by ink. He slid the journal into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He unlocked it and navigated to his Notes app, where he had begun sketching the framework for a nonprofit initiative. The working title, Voices in Flight, glowed at the top of the screen. He read through the bullet points he had drafted earlier in the cabin. Educational modules for flight crews on medical response and empathy-based communication. Partnerships with medical associations for certification programs. A digital platform where passengers could share safety concerns and suggestions in real time. A grant fund to support research in aviation health and passenger advocacy. Each idea resonated with potential, but also demanded rigorous planning. Marcus pressed a finger to his chin and closed his eyes. He imagined the faces of those who would benefit from this work, elderly travelers with complex medical needs, families journeying to reunions across continents, his own daughter Zoe, someday taking a flight and knowing that her father's actions had paved the way for a safer experience. He opened his eyes and began typing. He drafted a mission statement that read, "Voices in Flight exists to empower passengers and crew to act decisively and compassionately in the face of in-flight emergencies. We strive to elevate standards of care and foster a culture where every voice is heard and every life is valued." He paused and reread the words. They rang true, yet he knew that a mission without strategy was a wish. He tapped over to a new note to outline the first practical steps. Step 1. Convene a founding advisory board of medical experts, aviation professionals, and passenger rights advocates. Step 2. Develop a curriculum for interactive workshops and e-learning modules. Step 3. Pilot the first program with partner airlines. Step 4. Measure outcomes and refine content based on feedback. He leaned back in the chair and let himself envision each milestone unfolding smoothly. He took another breath and added, Step 5. Share success stories widely to build momentum and influence policy. A soft chime signaled that his phone battery was low. He plugged in the charger and stood, stretching his legs. His thoughts turned to the conversations he would need to have. He would call the head of training at several major carriers. He would reach out to professional associations representing flight attendants and pilots. He would contact Derek Sullivan to discuss the Medical Foundation's role in certification. He would send a personal note to Malik Thompson to thank him again for his courage. He wanted young advocates like Malik to know their contributions mattered. Marcus walked toward a coffee stand and ordered a cup of black coffee. He found a small table nearby and settled in. He sipped the hot liquid, slowly noting its bitter warmth. It grounded him in the moment, yet fueled his resolve. He took out a legal pad and began sketching a timeline for Voices in Flight. He allocated the first 3 months to research and stakeholder interviews, the next 3 months to curriculum development and pilot testing. 6 months later, a public launch event in Washington, D.C., and then a series of regional training sessions. He underlined each date and wrote brief notes about responsibilities and resource needs. As he worked, the terminal grew busier with evening travelers. Families hugged before farewells. Business people hurried past with scrolling tablets in hand. He observed them with fresh awareness. Each traveler carried hopes and anxieties. Some might slip into the mental shadows of fear during a medical scare at altitude. Others might remain silent even when they sensed danger. He wanted voices in flight to break that pattern. He would create tools that made it easy for people to speak up and step forward. He glanced at the clock on the wall and realized he had been planning for over an hour. He tapped a reminder to follow up tomorrow on contacting aviation regulatory bodies. He saved his notes and closed the pad. He felt a surge of satisfaction. The crisis had exposed gaps in training and protocol. His initiative would address those gaps with education and advocacy. He had turned trauma into transformation. He returned to his gate where Captain Lucas Beck and Derek Sullivan stood in conversation. Captain Beck nodded in Marcus's direction and said, "You look like a man on a mission." Marcus smiled and replied, "Yes, I am. Thank you both again for your support." Captain Beck clasped his hand firmly. "Your leadership made all the difference. I will personally champion these initiatives within our industry." Derek added, "Your vision matters, Marcus. Count me in for any medical training modules you need." Marcus thanked them both and felt gratitude for their immediate commitment. A steady flow of passengers emerged from the cabin and passed by. Some made eye contact and offered nods or thumbs up. Others whispered about the initiative they had just heard announced in the terminal moments earlier. Their reception buoyed him. He recognized that tangible change required community engagement. Even the smallest gesture of support would ripple outward. Later that evening, Marcus returned to his hotel room overlooking the city skyline. The lights of tall buildings formed a constellation of human endeavor and possibility. He placed his journal on the desk and sat on the edge of the bed. He opened the journal to the final blank page and wrote a simple note. Goals for voices in flight empower train. Advocate evaluate. Beneath that, he listed the names of key contacts he would call first. He closed the journal and leaned back, reflecting on the day's events. He allowed himself a moment of quiet gratitude for survival and solidarity. He recalled the fear that had gripped him as his airways constricted. He recalled the isolation he had felt when no one responded. He remembered the compassion that saved him and the power that comes from collective witness. He whispered into the stillness, "May every flight foster courage and care." In the soft glow of his hotel room, he felt both humbled and invigorated. He recognized that the success of Voices in Flight would depend on perseverance as much as inspiration. He would need to navigate logistical challenges, secure funding, and sustain public interest. He also knew that setbacks might come airlines slow to adopt new protocols, regulatory inertia, competing priorities. But he drew strength from the moment when ordinary people had stood up at altitude and ensured justice prevailed. That moment taught him that even in the face of apathy, people could choose action. He picked up his phone to send a final text to Malik Thompson. "Thank you for your bravery today." "You made a difference," Malik replied almost instantly. "Proud to be part of change. Keep pushing forward." Marcus felt warmth spread through him. He typed back, "We will change the world one flight at a time." He set the phone aside and stood by the window once more, gazing at the city lights. He breathed in deeply and exhaled slowly. Tomorrow he would rise early to begin the work. Tonight he would rest with the assurance that purpose can take wing. Marcus Reed stepped off the plane into the flood of terminal lighting and felt a rush of clarity wash over him. The events aboard Flight 427 had rippled across social media and news outlets, sparking change across an entire industry. Now grounded and surrounded by the hum of travelers, Marcus knew the moment had arrived to translate that momentum into lasting impact. He made his way to a quiet corner near a bank of charging stations and allowed himself a brief moment of reflection before turning his focus outward once more. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out his journal. Flipping to a blank page, he wrote a few words that captured the essence of his journey. So far, real change begins when we hear every voice. That sentence felt like both a conclusion and a beginning. He set the journal aside and opened the notes on his phone where he had sketched the framework for voices in flight. He reviewed the mission statement again. We exist to empower passengers and crew to act decisively when lives are at stake and to foster a culture of empathy and accountability in the skies. The words felt alive in that moment as travelers streamed past him, each carrying their own hopes and fears high above the ground. His eyes scanned the busy concourse, and he imagined inviting each person he passed to join the movement. He pictured flight attendants who would share new training techniques. He imagined pilots convening to discuss passenger well-being. He thought of family members who would no longer fear flying because they knew the crew was ready to respond. He felt the weight of responsibility deepen in his chest and let it ground him. He understood that his role now extended beyond advocacy into leadership and persistence. Marcus tapped out a quick message to the communications team at NovusLink Technologies. Please prepare a press release that highlights Voices in Flight. We will launch the website and social media channels by the end of the week. Include links to donate and to sign up for volunteer opportunities. He pressed send and watched as the message disappeared into the digital ether. He hoped that each word would translate into code and design and bring the initiative into public view. A gentle voice startled him. Captain Lucas Beck stood beside him with a warm expression on her face. Marcus, she said, the airline has agreed to host our first training workshop this month in partnership with your organization. They are even offering to fly our team out to 5 major hubs at no cost. We believe your approach will help all of us serve passengers better. Marcus turned and smiled gratefully. Thank you, Captain Beck. Your support means more than you know. Together we will raise the bar for in-flight safety and care. Nearby, Derek Sullivan emerged from the crowd and walked over. Marcus motioned him to join and offered a seat. Derek sat and looked out over the terminal floor. We heard from flight crews around the world who want to take your training. They saw what we saw, and they want to be ready in case it happens again. Marcus nodded and replied, That is exactly why we started this Voices in-flight initiative. We have to equip every human being who steps into that cabin with both the skills and the heart to act. He paused and added, without empathy, procedures become empty words. A small group of passengers who had witnessed the event approached. They were led by Malik Thompson, whose steadfast courage had captured global attention. Malik carried a camera bag slung across his shoulder and smiled broadly. Mr. Reed, he said, we want to start an online support network for people with severe allergies. That way they can share tips and warnings, and the platform can share that information with crew members in advance. Marcus felt pride swell in his chest. He laid a hand on Malik's shoulder. That is brilliant. We will integrate that feature into our website and mobile app. Together we can create a community that stands guard over each other. Marco Lewis joined them with a cup of coffee in his hand. Mr. Reed, he said, I have drafted a proposal for airlines to include allergy information on boarding passes. That way, your condition is visible before you even take your seat. No one can overlook a medical alert printed next to your name. Marcus accepted the coffee and replied, That idea will save lives. Let us work with aviation authorities to standardize that practice. Your initiative will be a model we can share globally. Brian Cho and Travis Mulligan stood on the edge of the group. Both looked nervous yet hopeful. Travis spoke first. Marcus. He said, I have enrolled in advanced medical response training, and I will volunteer to teach it to my colleagues. He glanced at Brian, who nodded and continued, I have joined the advisory board for Voices in Flight. I want to help design the empathy modules you mentioned. Marcus felt warmth for these two men who had once hesitated to act. He said, I appreciate your commitment. Your willingness to learn demonstrates that accountability can lead to growth and redemption. Henry Carrington stepped forward with a business card in hand. Marcus, he said, my firm will fund the initial grants for research into in-flight medical best practices. We will also host a symposium for airline executives next quarter to discuss policy changes. Marcus shook his hand firmly. Thank you for your tremendous support. Your investment will accelerate our progress and help travelers around the world feel safer. Surrounded by this group of allies, Marcus allowed himself a moment of quiet thanks. He drew in a slow breath and exhaled purposefully. The crowd around them continued to move and chatter, but their shared energy had woven a thread of solidarity through the terminal. He felt a sense of unity that transcended job titles and backgrounds. They were all travelers on the same journey toward a more compassionate sky. He stepped forward and addressed the circle. Today, we stand at the threshold of a new era in air travel, an era in which passengers and crew work in partnership to protect one another, an era in which empathy guides protocol and preparedness meets passion. Our voices will carry through training rooms and boardrooms and onto every flight manifest. Together we will ensure that no one ever feels alone at 35,000 feet. He paused and looked each person in the eye. When you leave today, carry this message with you. Speak up when you see a need, act in the service of others, and remember that a single choice can transform fear into safety. Let us commit to be the witnesses and the responders, the advocates and the allies. Let us work together to make wings safe for every heartbeat that travels upon them. As he spoke, a small crowd of travelers who had witnessed the conversation gathered to listen. Phones recorded the words and faces filled with hope. The moment felt sacred and celebratory. When he finished, they erupted in applause and cheers, making the terminal echo with sound. Marcus smiled and offered a nod of gratitude to the crowd and to his team. This was the resolution of a story that began with crisis and had reached its purpose through collective action. Later that evening, Marcus sat in his hotel room and watched video of the terminal event. He paused on clips that showed everyone stepping up to share ideas and pledges. He flipped to his journal and wrote two final lines. Purpose without community is hollow, and community without purpose is directionless. He closed the journal and looked out at the city lights, flickering like future possibilities. He tapped his phone one last time and sent a text to his daughter. Zoe can't wait to tell you about my day. You helped me remember that courage always starts with a single voice. She replied, Dad, you are my hero. Love you. He felt tears of joy well up and he typed back, love you more. He set the phone down and turned off the lamp. As he slid beneath the covers, he reflected on the journey from that first sip of water to this rally of advocates. He thought of the fear and the indifference, the rescue, and the reckoning, the solidarity, and the plan for transformation. He realized that every step along the way had taught him something vital about leadership and humanity, and he knew that the story of Flight 427 would live on in training manuals and keynote speeches and in every passenger who chose action over apathy. He closed his eyes with a sense of completion and anticipation. The resolution had been written not with words alone, but with deeds and commitments made at 35,000 feet. Now grounded, he would carry that resolution into every conversation and every campaign. The call to action had been sounded. The voices in flight would continue to rise. Tomorrow he would take the first step of the next chapter, but tonight he would rest in the knowledge that change had taken wing. As the doors of Flight 427 open and justice takes its first steps on solid ground, we're left with more than a thrilling mid-air courtroom. We carry Marcus Reed's breathless struggle, Derek Sullivan's life-saving resolve, and the collective awakening of every passenger who chose to act. We feel both the sting of their initial indifference and the warmth of their ultimate compassion. This is a story of courage kindled at 35,000 feet and a call to each of us never to let silence kill. If this tale moved you, if it stirred your empathy and your outrage against discrimination, don't let the conversation end here. Like this video, share it to spark change in your own circle, and subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter where real people challenge injustice in unexpected places. Because every voice matters, and the fight for dignity never lands.